One of the things that you do when you're waking up is you're recognizing patterns. You're recognizing, so a lot of the people who wake up, when you first wake up, you go back to ancient history, right? You go back ancient there's archaeology, right? And then you study what happened in the past, and then you say, is it happening again? What happened to the Mayans? Is it happening again? And then you start to see a pattern. Maybe there is a pattern, and maybe you're just seeing the pattern in your mind, and that's when we come up with those theories that something happened, 12,000 years ago, and something happened 6,000 years ago, and something happened 2,000 years ago, and something happened 600 years ago, and it's happening again. Now, most of the time, the people who are deducing these patterns are deducing the patterns of destruction, right? Whether it's the complete and utter end of the world so that a new world can take over, or some kind of ascension. But it's a collapse. It's a spiritual collapse of which we will rise up like the phoenix. But it's this kind of intent. There's this kind of intensity to it. The pattern is often negative. People don't see good patterns. And good patterns, they don't sell a lot of books. They don't get you on television. They don't get you invited to podcasts. So instead of talking about ancient past, I'm going to talk about the modern era. Because there are things happening in the modern era that have been painted, let's use that word loosely, painted in such a way as to make us feel that there's going to be destruction. Now, some of you might know what I'm talking about. It's a series of events, incidences, catastrophes, right? Go back to my original word, pattern. But it's the modern era. So the modern era is not objective. So if you go to the past, we can say, well, these things happened, and it's not necessarily a conspiracy because, the 12,000 years ago had nothing to do with 6,000 years ago. So we can say that those are similar, but they're objective, right? There was no conspiracy between the 12,000 and the 6,000 because it's a different culture, different country, and yet the same pattern. In the modern era, we have these patterns, catastrophes, tragedies, incidences, disasters that appear to be a pattern, but they're happening in the same era. They're happening in the same period, decades, right? And this has to do with the weather. The weather. Whether it's an earthquake, volcanic eruption, a hurricane, tornado, storm, right? An extreme weather event. There can be wood fires, right? Wood fires. And what's happening is that all of these weather-related events, so let's go through the list again. Earthquakes, tidal waves, hurricanes, heavy downpours, polar storms, right? Everything freezes, the temperatures are down, temperatures are up. Anything weather related or climate has been, that's the pattern. They're saying they're all connected. Again, but that's subjective because we're in the same era. We're in the same decade, same century, similar century. The last 50 years, the last 40 years. And the difference is from the past, if you know the past, in the past, they didn't have science. Science has only been around since Newton. Newton was how long ago? 300 years ago? 400? Science, right? After the Renaissance. So again, history. See, history. There's a pattern. There was the Renaissance, and the intellectuals rose up. Artists, painters, philosophers. Kant, Immanuel Kant. Philosophy rose up, and science. Newton, and technology, right? Alexander Bell. So Einstein. Those are all the result of this shift, and that's a different shift. But so science is new. The last few hundred years. So what was happening in the past when there was a weather event, when there was an earthquake? We blame the gods because society was spiritual or worship deities. So if you go to any country in the past, there were the Greek deities, right? The pantheon of gods for the Greeks, the pantheon of gods for the Romans, the pantheon of gods for the Egyptians. And then you had, in the East, you had the Buddhism and the Bodhisattvas. And India had the Hindu gods. So everything was connected to God. So if there was an earthquake, you blame God. If you believed in the smaller gods, the pantheon, you blame the pantheon. You are responsible, right? Zeus is the thunder and lightning, and the other god is responsible for the harvest, for the earth, for the trees. So, because there was no real science, there was magic. There was this cultural belief: blame the gods, blame the gods, blame the gods. So what's happening now is we don't believe in gods anymore. We don't blame gods. How many people blame gods for earthquakes? Right? How many people do you see blaming a god or the god for an earthquake, for a catastrophe? They don't. It's all attributed to climate. And because we worship science, we don't worship God. Despite what people think, God doesn't have much say in the world. In your personal life, maybe. We don't know. I don't know. But in the world, what runs the world is science. We worship science. Science is the God, right? Because what science tells us, what science is telling everybody, is that the rise in carbon is causing these weather events. And we go one step further. If we do not decrease that carbon output, because it's proven, we don't decrease that output, we are all going to die. That's climate change. That's what they call climate change. If we were back 3,000 years ago in ancient Egypt, they would say, "To hell with you gods," right? Because gods are causing the weather catastrophes, the droughts. The desert was a result of the gods. So, but if you look at it though, right? If you look at what's happening, the fact that we're all going to die, it's the end of the world. Climate change is saying, if you don't change, it's the end of the world. And you got to reduce carbon, so everybody has to go electric. If everybody goes electric, then the carbon will drop, we will be saved. That is the solution. That's the answer. The answer. There's no God, right? You're not worshiping God. You're worshiping science. Carbon. Carbon is our God. Whether you accept it or not, by accepting climate change, you are worshiping carbon as your God. We will appease the carbon God by no longer driving, shutting down factories. We will appease the God, and the God will give us mercy of carbon, and he will reduce carbon, and we will live. Thank you. Thank you to the carbon God. And to the priests. Who are the priests now? The priests are technically scientists. They're the new preachers, the evangelists. Carbon is our enemy. We must destroy carbon. It says here in the book of carbon, in the book of science. So it is he who is born from carbon who shall destroy the climate and shall cause unending catastrophes upon the world. Are they not evangelists? Are we not listening to evangelists? Is it not the end of the world? Is another way to call climate change an end of the world scenario? I think so, right? Now, I'm not against science. I'm not suggesting that there's no catastrophe. I'm not saying there's no wood fire. I'm not saying that earthquakes don't exist. It's an illusion. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that those have been happening for tens of thousands of years. Earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, rainstorms. There was a flood. Remember the flood? The biblical flood. Noah had to build an ark because it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. But here's the question. Was anybody driving a car when Noah was around? And how many cars were on the road when Noah, the builder of the ark, was around and it rained for 40 days and 40 nights? So again, we go to history. There's a pattern, something can happen. But in ancient history, there's no car. There's no carbon output, man-made. There's no factory. So what kind of thing could output so much carbon? We're talking a massive amount of carbon that would cause it to rain for 40 days and 40 nights. Nobody knows. But that's a kind of a conundrum, isn't it? Isn't that a conundrum? Like, if carbon is causing weather changes, what caused the flood? God? Are you saying God caused the flood? But where's God now? If he can cause a great flood, why can't he fix all the weather problems we're having? Right? Like at some point you kind of have to, you can't rationalize everything. It doesn't make sense. It's confusing. Because what was causing the earthquakes in the past? What was causing the hurricanes and the desert storms and the flood and the lightning in the past if no one's driving a car? Because cars produce carbon and other man-made factories and what have you. So scientists have not kind of brought this into the equation. But instead, we're focusing on the last, 30, 40 years. There's a pattern, these extreme weather events. In my research, I'm aware that climate weapons exist, and climate weapons, also known as eco-terrorism, is real, and it was discussed by the U.S. Department of Defense, eco-terrorism. And the Department of Defense itself said there are weapons that can cause earthquakes. That's not me saying it. And there are weapons that can augment storms and cause shifts in temperature, right? Because if you're going to have a snowstorm, you can make it a polar storm. If you're going to have a rainfall, you can make a torrential downpour. You might not be able to cause rain. That might be more obvious. That might be more obvious if it just starts to rain. But if it's raining, it's rain time, and then you just augment it. And if it's already stated there are earthquake machines, I'm pretty certain the earthquake machine can cause volcanoes to kind of prematurely erupt. It's all plausible by science. That's science, right? That's science. So in my philosophy, that we have these two things going on. There's the natural and there's the artificial. And they're being connected together because it serves a purpose, right? Let's find some light here. It serves a purpose. What's the purpose? The purpose is climate change. But if we were to break down what's artificial, what's natural, was that a natural event? Again, for thousands of years, we've had natural events and the world has not ended. Now, in recent years, with the advancements in technology and the availability and the deployment of climate weapons, space weapons, which was discussed, back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, the weaponization of space. It was a concern, right? The weaponization of space was a concern. And that was 50s, 60s, 70s. So now we're in 2023, 50 years, 50, 60 years. So they've had a lot of time to test things, put things up in space, right? So we don't know, but we don't know what they have. I'm saying they have stuff. I'm saying that you can see by some of these events and these catastrophes, the signature is remarkable and it's artificial. And I've discussed this and I've written a book about it, World War C, World War Climate. So just so I'm clear, I'm not against climate. I'm not denying climate. I'm not denying that the earthquake wasn't real, that there's a little warmer this year and there's a little more rain than last year. I'm saying that there's another aspect. So there's two. We need to separate that, and we're not doing that. But the other thing I'm saying is, if those two things are true, if there's a natural and an artificial, then is the world going to end by reducing carbon footprints? By not reducing carbon footprints, right? Will the world end by too much carbon? That's the fundamental question. Or does this all go away after we're all electric and then somebody just shuts off the switch? That's the kind of the, if my theory is right, if there's artificially induced weather events and there's natural weather events and we're combining them, right? And that's wrong. But if they are together and given this artificial component, there's nothing wrong with the weather. If we make change and we go electric, everything electric, if everything becomes electric, and then they say, okay, everybody's going electric, now we just turn off the switch. And then the weird climate events and the extreme weather events all stop because I've turned off the switch. How will you feel? And conversely, if we don't change, if we don't believe in climate change, and we refuse to go all electric, are they going to amp up those machines, right? Are they going to cause more disasters and more deaths until we're like, okay, I give up. I don't care what it is. Stop killing people. Right? So we're in this situation. Because I'm saying that there's an artificial component and it's covered up. Now, we could also say, speaking about cover-ups, we could also say, if there were several agencies with these machines, as just hypothetical, if there were several agencies with these machines, right? And then one group causes an earthquake, the other group tries to stop the earthquake, and then there's a result from that, and then there's one guy tries to amp up the storm, another guy tries to create a storm in their country. If all of these things are going on, like a weather war, then if we don't want people to know about it, we have to say the weather is acting funny. It's climate change. Just to cover up what's going on. So I'm taking it one step back, right? So what if there's like a weather war going on, nothing to do with carbon, and the agencies are like, well, people are going to ask questions. They're going to figure out there's something going on. So we're going to call it climate change. We'll send out our spokespeople, our cutouts. Climate change, science, carbon, that's carbon. Don't think any beyond that, please. Don't think beyond that. But that's when they start to call you a conspiracy theorist. But it's not a conspiracy theory if the Department of Defense has already admitted eco-terrorism, and the existence of space weapons has been around since 60s. There was a popular movie in 1962, Our Man Flint, which had a weather weapon that would be used to control the world. That was the bad guy was using a weather weapon. 1962. So how many years is that? 72, 82, 92, 202, and 60 years ago. 60 years ago, there was a movie, fictional, of the villain, a bad group. They want to control the world by controlling the weather. And there's been other instances in movies. So the idea, what I'm saying is the idea, and that's before me, that was before I was ever invented. So the idea of weather control has been around before. Many of you, if you're, you know, a lot of people now, you know, in your 20s, way before you were born, these weather weapons were being invented. Space weapons were real, right? Star Wars was a program about the weaponization of space, putting missiles up in space. So this has all been around pre-80s. So it's been up there for 50, 60 years, right? And now you fast forward in the last 10 or 15 years, 16 years, climate change, because it's gone out of control now. Like they just can't, no one's going to come up and say what it is, because that would get into, you would get into national secrets, because you'd have to work for the government. I'm a theorist. I can't confirm any of that. It's speculation, it's a theory. That's my theory, right? I'm not a spokesperson. I don't work for the government. It's a theory. But it's important to understand, like, we have to kind of find a way to modulate our life and not to always be afraid that the world's going to end, right? Because the world's not going to end. And we're going to have to upend our entire life just to think we can stop carbon, which is, we're made of carbon. 18% of our body is carbon. The planet is carbon. There's carbon in the air. There's carbon in the ocean. Seaweed traps carbon. I remember this discussion about carbon 30 years ago. They were going to do things with the ocean to trap, because the ocean traps carbon, right? And trees trap carbon. So that deforestation, you lose some of that carbon trapping. So we've lost a lot of our forest. So that's part of the problem too, deforestation. There's a lot of things going on, and I'm not a scientist. I don't have the answer. All I'm saying is, maybe there's no pattern, that all of these catastrophes and events, there's not a pattern. It's not a sign of God that it's going to be the end of the world. And I think that I don't want to think that the world is going to end on this note. But there's a lot of things, strange things happening, and there's a lot of possibilities. And, you know, I think it's important to keep an open mind. Just keep an open mind. And stay safe. If there's an earthquake, run for cover. If there's a storm, put on your rubber boots. Like, I'm not saying, stand there and it's an illusion. It's not an illusion. What I'm saying is, these events may not be a pattern. There may be other patterns going on. So we have to kind of step back, take a breath, and say, yeah, things are changing. You can improve your life. If you want to buy electric, buy electric. I think we should have been driving electric, 100 years ago. They had an electric car. Before the 1900s, late 1800s, there were electric cars. But they had issues with the battery. They didn't have the battery technology. So the idea of an electric vehicle is not new either. So this is the one thing if anybody's really is young, if you're young, or if you don't know your history, the stuff is not new, right? because global warming was discussed in the 80s and 90s. It was before global warming. It was called global cooling. The scientists said that the world is going to freeze. We're going to die by ice, not by fire. Global cooling, and that was the end of the world scenario, propagated by scientists. The world is cooling. It's cooling too fast. We're going to freeze to death. And then the temperatures were spiking and changing, and it was warming up again. And they said, no, it's not global cooling. It's global warming. We're gonna boil. The oceans are gonna run over, and we're all gonna sink. You're gonna live on an island. This is the 80s and 90s. So this stuff has been going on for a very long time, right? The electric vehicle was available in the 1800s, late 1800s. We could have bought it then, right? And then, for some reason, the gasoline combustion engine took off. Oil companies became very powerful, right? Maybe we should blame them. Like, it's a little simplistic to say climate change, buy electric, carbon. Like, it's a very good, like, ad. Like, if you got a 30-second ad, it works. But if you know the history, and other things I don't know, but if you know the history, just the history we've been talking about, there's so much going on that we can't boil it down to like a few points, right? We can say those are factors. We can say there's a factor, but there's too much going on. And so my suggestion, and why I like doing these talks, is because I want people to say there's a lot more going on than what we're told. Now, maybe I don't have everything right, but think about it. Research, right? Don't get into this mindset of just, right? I'm going to shell out all this money for an electric car. By the same token, we have to make changes. We have to make improvements. So it's a very difficult situation because the world is going to end, and they're cutting out gasoline engines. And what do? I guess, right? Right. But on the out, just as we end here, on the end, it's like, well, if everybody drives electric and they're going to stop talking about it and they're going to shut off the machines, maybe it's a good thing. And then if they shut off our electricity, then that's not a good thing. Then it's another issue. There's another issue. Keep an open mind.